Escort her out. The voice came from across the room, loud enough to cut through to the string quartet and the clink of champagne flutes, loud enough for 30 people to hear, loud enough that the servers near the kitchen door stopped moving. He was pointing at Marlene. Marlene Etcheby had been standing near the east wall of the Rideau Club's main dining room, holding a tray of water glasses, wearing the same black and white uniform as every other catering staff member that evening. She had not spilled anything. She had not said anything. She had simply been standing in the wrong spot at the wrong moment in the eye line of Gerald Sinclair, and that apparently was enough. I said, escort her out. She's making the room look cluttered. Nobody moved right away. That was the thing about moments like this. There was always a half second where the room collectively held its breath, hoping someone else would sort it out. Then Terence, the floor manager for the evening, walked over to Marlene with an apologetic expression he had clearly rehearsed. "Ma'am, if you could just—" "I heard him," Marlene said. She set the tray down on the nearest surface, a side table near the window, and she straightened her jacket. She did not look at Terence. She looked across the room at Gerald Sinclair, who had already turned back to his conversation, already forgetting she existed, and she held that look for 3 full seconds before she walked, unhurried, toward the hallway. Nobody in that room knew who she was. That was, of course, the point. The Rideau Club sits at the corner of Wellington and Metcalfe in Ottawa, 13 floors above the street, with a view of Parliament Hill that makes powerful people feel more powerful simply by standing near the windows. It has been the quiet dining room of Canadian politics and finance for 150 years. Prime ministers have eaten here, judges, senators, CEOs, the kind of people who do not need to announce their importance because every room they walk into already knows it. Gerald Sinclair knew it. He had been a member for 11 years, and he wore that membership the way some men wear a watch, not because they need to tell the time, but because they want you to notice the weight of it on their wrist. He was 63, broad-shouldered in a way that had once been athletic and now was simply large. With silver hair he kept cut short and an expression that sat permanently at the border between confident and impatient. He ran Sinclair Capital Group, a private equity firm headquartered in Toronto, with offices in Calgary and Vancouver, and he had spent the better part of 3 decades acquiring smaller companies, restructuring them, and selling the pieces. He was very good at it. He was also very good at making sure everyone in a room understood, within the first few minutes, that his time was worth more than theirs. The gala that evening was for the Birchwood Foundation, a registered charity that funded early literacy programs in northern and remote communities across Canada. 300 guests, $900 a plate, a live auction with a Muskoka cottage as the headline lot. On paper, it was the kind of event that made people feel good about themselves. On paper, Marlene had been standing in that room for 4 hours before Gerald Sinclair pointed at her. She had watched him work the crowd, watched him shake hands and laugh at his own jokes, and put his arm around the foundation's executive director in a way that suggested ownership rather than affection. She had watched him buy 2 auction items with the casual energy of a man paying for parking. She had watched the way the room bent slightly toward him whenever he moved through it, the way conversations paused and resumed when he arrived and departed. She had also, quietly, been listening to everything he said. The hallway outside the dining room was narrow and carpeted in burgundy, lit by sconces that cast a warm, forgettable light. Marlene walked to the end of it, past the coat room, past a drinks trolley left against the wall, and stopped near the window that looked out over Wellington Street. Down below, a city bus turned the corner, its lights yellow against the October dark. She took her phone out of her jacket pocket. "He just had me removed from the room," she said. The voice on the other end was calm. "You okay?" "Fine. He said I was making the room look cluttered." A pause. "Marlene, I know. We can pull you out. We have enough from the afternoon. We don't have Kowalski on tape with him. Not yet. I need 20 more minutes." Another pause, longer this time. "Terence is going to wonder why you're still in the building. I'll figure out Terence." She looked at her reflection in the dark window, A woman in a catering uniform, 61 years old, close-cropped gray hair, reading glasses tucked into her breast pocket. She looked exactly like what Gerald Sinclair had decided she was. That was the thing about assumptions. They were so easy to maintain. Get Reyes into position near the east stairwell. Kowalski always steps out for a call around 9:30. I want someone on the other side of that door when he does. She put the phone away. She picked up the drinks trolley from against the wall. She walked back toward the dining room. Terence was standing near the door with the expression of a man who genuinely did not know what to do with himself. When he saw Marlene coming, he took a half step forward. "Ma'am," I thought. "Mr. Sinclair asked me to bring the Macallan to his table," Marlene said, not breaking stride. Apparently the 12-year wasn't what he ordered. It was not true, but Terence did not know that, and the trolley had a bottle of Macallan on it, and Marlene said it with the flat certainty of someone who had been taking orders from difficult men for decades, and had simply stopped being rattled by them. Terence stepped aside. She rolled the trolley back into the room. There are people in this world who move through rooms like they own the walls and the ceiling and the light fixtures, too. Gerald Sinclair was one of them. And there are people who move through rooms like they are barely there, like they are part of the furniture, part of the wallpaper, present but not acknowledged, seen but not registered. Those people hear things. Marlene Achibi had spent 32 years learning to be the second kind of person. She had joined the RCMP at 29, late by some measures, after 8 years working compliance at a mid-sized investment firm in Montreal. She had watched from the inside how financial crime operated, not with guns and drama, but with paperwork and patience and the careful construction of structures that looked, from a distance, like legitimate business. When she finally joined the Financial Integrity Unit, she brought with her a particular kind of fluency that most officers had to learn from textbooks. She already knew the language. She already knew where the bodies were buried, metaphorically speaking. She had made superintendent at 54 the first black woman to hold that rank in her unit, a fact that had been noted in a press release and then quietly set aside by most of the people around her, which was, in her experience, exactly what progress looked like in practice. Acknowledged once, then ignored. She had been planning to retire in February. Then the Birchwood file landed on her desk. It had started, as these things often do, with a tip. An accountant in Gatineau who had done contract work for a company called Birchwood Partners, not the Foundation, a separate entity with a nearly identical name, had noticed something that bothered him enough to call a number he found on the RCMP website at 2 a.m. The foundation raised money for literacy programs in remote communities. Birchwood Partners, registered 6 years ago in Alberta, appeared to do nothing at all except receive transfers from the foundation's general fund and disperse them at irregular intervals to a numbered company in the Cayman Islands. The accountant's name was not important. What was important was what he had brought with him: 3 years of bank statements, 2 sets of conflicting financial reports, and a very clear picture of approximately $4.7 million, moving somewhere it had no business moving. The foundation's board chair was Gerald Sinclair. The registered director of Birchwood Partners was a man named Paul Kowalski, who was also, quietly, the CFO of Sinclair Capital Group. This was not a coincidence. Marlene wheeled the trolley to the far side of the room and parked it near the bar. She poured nothing for no one. She stood, and she listened, and she watched Gerald Sinclair hold court at his table near the window, Parliament Hill lit up behind him through the glass, like a backdrop someone had ordered specially. He was talking about the foundation, about its work, about the children in Nunavut who were learning to read because of programs the foundation funded. He said it with the warmth of a man who genuinely believed himself, and that was the most troubling thing, not the performance of it, but the sincerity. He had raised money for a cause that mattered, and he had also stolen from it, and those two facts lived inside him, without apparent contradiction. At 9:27, Paul Kowalski excused himself from the table. Kowalski was younger than Sinclair by about 15 years, lean and fair-haired, with the slightly harried look of a man who handles the details for someone who never has to think about details. He moved through the room without the same gravitational pull as his boss, slipping between tables with his phone already in his hand, heading for the door. Marlene counted to 15 and followed. The east stairwell door was heavy and closed slowly. She caught it before it latched. Kowalski was on the landing below. Phone pressed to his ear, voice low but not low enough. I told him we needed to move the second transfer before the audit window. No, I understand that, but the Cayman account. He stopped, looked up. Marlene was standing on the stairs above him. He stared at her. She was still holding a cloth napkin, the kind you carry when you work catering, and she looked at him with the calm expression of a woman who had taken a wrong turn looking for the service elevator. "Sorry," she said. "Wrong floor." She turned and went back up the stairs. Her hands were not shaking. They never did anymore. At 9:45, Gerald Sinclair noticed her again. She was clearing a side table near the bar, stacking used glasses onto a tray, moving slowly and methodically the way you do when you are not in a hurry and do not intend to be noticed. But Sinclair had sharp eyes for people he had already decided to dislike, and he caught sight of her, and his expression shifted into something flat and irritated. He said something to the man beside him. The man looked over at Marlene. Then Sinclair pushed back his chair. He walked across the room with the particular stride of a man who has decided to correct something. "I thought I told Terence to have you removed." Marlene set a glass down on the tray. She did not look up immediately. "You did," she said. "Then why are you still in my room?" She thought, for a moment, about all the rooms she had walked into over 32 years. The boardrooms and the back offices and the courthouse hallways. The early years when she had to prove herself twice as hard to be taken half as seriously. And the later years when she had simply stopped needing other people to see it because she knew what she was, and that turned out to be enough. She thought about the accountant in Gatineau up at 2 in the morning, troubled enough by what he had found to call a number on a government website. She thought about the children in Nunavut. She looked up. "It isn't your room," she said. Sinclair blinked. He was not accustomed to that particular tone from that particular kind of person in that particular context, and for a moment the circuits didn't connect. "I beg your." She reached into the breast pocket of her jacket. She took out her credentials, the real ones, not the catering staff ID she'd been carrying all evening, and she held them up, open, at eye level. Superintendent Marlene Achabe, RCMP Financial Integrity Unit. She kept her voice even, unhurried, the same tone she'd used for 30 years. "Gerald Sinclair, I am placing you under arrest for fraud over $5,000, breach of trust, and money laundering in connection with the misappropriation of funds from the Birchwood Foundation." The string quartet was still playing. Somewhere across the room, a woman laughed at something. A bright social laugh, before the sound of it, reached her, and she understood that the energy in the room had changed, and the laugh died in the middle of itself. Sinclair stared at the badge. He did not look powerful. He looked like a man who had just realized, in the space of 5 seconds, that the structure he had spent years building had a foundation he had never bothered to check. "This is," he started. "Constables Reyes and Park are at the main entrance," Marlene said. "There are 2 more officers in the lobby. Mr. Kowalski has already been detained." She lowered the credentials and put them back in her pocket. "You have the right to retain and instruct counsel without delay. Do you understand?" The dining room was quiet now. 30 tables of Ottawa's most careful people, and every single one of them was watching. Sinclair's mouth moved without producing sound. "Do you understand?" Marlene said again. Same tone, same patience. "Yes," he said finally. The word came out small. She nodded once. "Then let's go." She walked him out through the main dining room, not the back. She could have taken the service corridor, could have spared him the walk past 30 tables of people who knew his name and his reputation and his Muskoka cottage. She did not. She was not cruel about it. She did not draw it out or slow her pace to give anyone extra time to look. But she walked him out the way the law required, in plain sight, without apology, and she held the door open with one hand and gestured ahead of her with the other, the same gesture she would have made for anyone. Terence was standing near the coat check when they came through. He saw Sinclair's face, and then he saw Marlene's, and his mouth opened and then closed again. She gave him a small, polite nod as she passed. Constable Reyes was waiting at the main entrance, as promised. He took Sinclair's arm gently and walked him toward the elevator. Marlene stood in the corridor for a moment after they turned the corner. The building hummed around her. Somewhere above, the string quartet had started playing again. Life in those rooms continued, as it always did. The champagne was still cold, the auction paddles were still being raised, the view of Parliament Hill was still exactly as impressive as it had been an hour ago. The room adjusted, the way rooms do, and by tomorrow most of those 30 tables would have a version of tonight's story that made it smaller and more manageable than it actually was. She put on her coat. She took the elevator down. Outside, the air had the particular sharpness of an Ottawa October that means business. Not quite winter, but done pretending to be fall. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment, watching a delivery van idle at the corner, its exhaust rising white in the cold. Her phone buzzed. Her daughter, calling from Vancouver. "Mom, you eating? I'll eat when I get home. You always say that, because it's always true." Her daughter made a skeptical sound. How was the thing tonight? Marlene looked up at the Rideau Club, at the lit windows on the upper floors, at the faint movement of figures visible through the glass. "Productive," she said. "That's a very cop answer. I'm a very cop person." A pause, soft and fond. "You retiring or not? February's coming. I know when February is mom." "I know," she said. "I know." She stood on the sidewalk a moment longer, the city moving around her the way cities do, indifferent and continuous. A cab went by. Someone's terrier pulled hard at a leash near the corner. The Parliament buildings stood at the end of the street, lit up gold against the black sky, the way they had stood through every administration, every scandal, every quiet reckoning that never made the front page. She buttoned her coat. She started walking. There was a warrant still open on the numbered company in the Caymans, and a forensic accountant in her unit who had been waiting 3 weeks for authorization to pull the full transfer records, and a case file on her desk that was going to need her in the morning. February could wait.